Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Processing Severance, the Aftershow podcast based on the show Severance. We all cannot believe season 2, the last episode, episode 10 is here. We are excited to dive into a deep conversation. I'd love to welcome my Lumen team here, Rob L.
Hey, refiners. I'm really excited, and most of all, I have the most wiles of all of my flock.
Thank you, Rob. Shadan L.
Hi everyone. I can't believe it's our last episode of the season. This may yield an embarrassing emotional response. We shall see.
And we have a new face with us here today, Diego A. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. Such a blast. I can't believe these past 10 weeks have flown by. I'm excited to talk about them.
Well, we're excited to have you here. And before we dive deeper into this episode, which there is a lot to talk about, right, team? We want to give a shout out to all of you who've been listening, who've been watching, who've been commenting, and who've been emailing us. Thank you. Again, our email is processingseverance@gmail.com. I know it's episode 10, but I'm still sharing it with you in case you have any final thoughts to share with us. We'd love to stay in touch with you. And I want to give a shout out to one of the comments that we received by Wild Coyote Moncure Smith. Did I forget to say my name? I'm Rasha G, by the way. Okay, so this was the comment that came in. Don't think Lumen is set to market this technology. I think they're using the outside world to test whatever they ultimately want to do. In essence, rather than use whomever the procedure will benefit, the dangerous parts of the construction of the ultimate goal is applied to the public rather than the ultimate benefactor. Great observation. The end goal is the success of the technology applied to whatever they are trying to do, whether it be bring back such and such or whatever it leads to. I think this is a great segue into what's happening into episode 10. Clearly, we know that Lumen does not really care about the people who work for them, the people that are at the higher levels there, including, of course, the owners. They're the only ones who are really interested in what's happening with the technology. I think the human life, the human value is just a secondary part to them. What are my team's thoughts on this?
Yes. I think
Don't
yes.
go on.
I know, everybody calm down. No, honestly, I think like it's pretty clear that whatever they're doing is more nefarious than what some of the commenters and even myself thought maybe even a week or two ago where they're trying to market some new amazing thing for the world that didn't have to deal with grief or going to the dentist. I think this is a bit more nefarious. And I think that, this commenter is onto it because in the opening scene, I think that bears itself out when Helly R is saying to James, the very weird James Egan, how weird he is and how they've created hell and they're going to burn in it. Like something very bad is happening. And I think we learn a little bit more throughout the episode. So comment, tick, I agree.
All right. Anyone else before we jump into episode 10?
I'd actually want to say I think they're right in that there's something a little bit darker going on. I still could see a world where that includes marketing this program and everything to come with it as a positive for the entire world. I could see a world where it's marketed to, the mass population as like, oh, this is, a great way to, not feel pain and X, Y, and Z. But, having nefarious intention underneath that. I think that personally might make for a little bit more of an interesting conflict. I think I would not like it very much if if it stays as something that's a little bit less, external. Just because I think, especially in the world that we're living in, I think one of the scariest things that can happen is something gets accepted by the public, as a positive when it clearly has a negative intent that will affect people in the long term.
Well, they say
That's never happened before, right?
Exactly.
say overtly in the episode, oh, Kier like wants to eliminate pain from the world. But so I think they're trying to say, oh, we're trying to do this positive thing, but that's clearly not what's gonna happen. But yes, they're going to market it as a positive thing.
And
But
we
they're
see that throughout the testing, right? We see that throughout the testing. All right. Episode 10, titled Cold Harbor, which is what we've been talking about in the last few episodes. This episode was directed by Ben Stiller and written by Dan Erickson, of course, created by Dan Erickson as well. My God, there were so many moments. There were some unexpected things that I think that came up in this episode. Of course, a lot happening on, I think, as far as cinematography and music. I know there were some moments that really hit hard, Rob. So I'd love to start with you on what stood out to you in this episode, just starting maybe even in the first half.
Yeah. So yeah, as you mentioned, Russia, there's so much that we can unpack here, but for me, I was very impressed with this innovative use of the cabin narrative device for the innie and outie marks to communicate with each other. And at first, it was a bit laborious, as it needed to be, to explain and set up how it was happening, how he would go outside and come inside. And eventually, they started cutting it even quicker and quicker so that we could watch this conversation happen fluidly. And I found that so compelling, and has as the emotional undercurrents, particularly from Innie Mark S, ramped up, so did the music, the editing, the cinema. Everything was really ramped up to the point where it was a full-blown argument that we were watching in real time. We've never really had that payoff before like that. And it really, really cements to me the whole point of this episode, and perhaps even the season and the show. And that's about agency and about the right to exist that these innies feel, that Lumon and all the outies have constantly dismissed as not being relevant. It gave me something to really think about. But then I had to kind of put that aside, because then we started getting marching bands and other things, and I had to forget about it. So generally speaking, I was very impressed with that in the beginning. I thought the first half of the episode was completely fantastic because of that.
And you know what it reminded me of too? In our past conversations, the word revolution had come up, right? So all of a sudden we see these innies throughout the episode, throughout, especially like season one, as we started off season two, kind of following protocol, but we're starting to see them starting to think on their own a little bit, starting to have opinions, starting to revolt. And I feel like this episode just kind of culminated into this grand escalation of like where they are revolting. Shadon, I'm going to jump to you. What stood out for you? And I know it was emotional for me, girl. We'll get into that.
I was gonna say, you guys know, if you've watched any of these episodes, I tend to kind of lean to the more emotional sides of things, and there were a lot of moments that really got to me. I mean, just the fact that Gemma's Cold Harbor test was the building of a crib, I thought was so beautiful. And to Rob's point, there's a point where Helly says, like, they give us half a life and they think we're not going to fight for it, and I found that really profound, like this idea that like, even whatever they're given is worth fighting for. And that's kind of what we saw in the episode. And I thought, it was fascinating how at some points you're sort of rooting for any mark, at some points you're rooting for outie mark, and you're kind of torn between the one cares for Gemma, one cares for Helly. I thought that was like just a really fascinating thing. A really small moment that I have to mention that got to me emotionally was the letter that Outie Dylan writes for Innie Dylan, and he says, I've never really amounted to much. So when I saw that my wife, kind of cared for you, I felt like maybe at some point she would feel that way for me. I'm paraphrasing, but I thought that was just beautiful. So I thought there were a lot of these little nuggets of emotion that I really liked. I do think overall the episode was a little bit disjointed, like maybe the first half of the episode that Rob was talking about could have been another episode. Like, I felt like there was this clear sort of demarcation point where Mark says to Helly, like, I have something to tell you, and she says, I have something to tell you too, and it like cuts. And I felt like that would have been maybe like a great something to have before, or like separately. I don't know, because then we get into the marching band and the all the stuff with Gwendolyn Christie, which I just thought was wild, and the blood. But I'm happy, and I feel bad. I feel like I come on this podcast and I maybe I'm a little bit too nitpicky, but it's just because I love this show so much and I hold it to such a high standard, and so sometimes it's like hard not to get frustrated with the little things. But overall, I'm happy.
You should be nitpicky, and I'll come back to this too, but the band was a little too much. I mean, this episode was an hour and I think 16 or 17 minutes, right? I mean, it was one of the longest ones of the entire season. And I felt like some of the band stuff could have been cut down a little bit. But yes, Diego.
I love this show. It's very near and dear to my heart since season one. And I do think the season started really, really strong. And the last two episodes, like, 8, I was pretty sold on it. I think 9, as I'm sure you mentioned previously, like, that one fell a bit flat for me. And I think these had a lot of high highs and a lot of not necessarily low lows, but things that I think that where the concept was really interesting and exciting, but the execution felt a little bit flat and maybe could have used a couple more rewrites. One moment that I really do want to highlight that's on the smaller side is that moment where you have the conversation with Mark and Helly as he's almost finishing up, the 25th file. I thought it was brilliant how it kind of intercut both of those kind of things happening at the same point. I think a lesser show would have had those two beats happen in separate moments, but I think that's just a testament to something that Severance just does incredibly well, which is taking these kind of more plot driven, cold calculated moments and intercutting them with things that hold a little bit more emotion. And I think that's why at the end of the day, like despite the flaws that I had with the episode, I think it was incredibly strong. And I don't know if we want to jump into the ending right now, but I have a lot of thoughts on that as well.
Excellent. I love that you mentioned the editing because I felt like those jump cuts, as Rob had mentioned too, in the with Mark S. We saw a lot more of that in this episode than we have previously, and I don't know if it was to maybe help move the scenes a little bit more, but I definitely noticed that was implemented a lot more in this. Listen, one thing, Shadon, with the heart, like Dylan's note hit for you. I think what hit for me was seeing Gemma's face in that door because these last few episodes we've been fighting for Mark and Gemma, and you're just like, oh my God, is the hero going to get his wife? And are they going to come together? And you see this moment of when it's finally happening, but then the innie is making this different choice. And so that to me was such a pivotal moment, and just I felt like there was a dagger going through my heart. So that was really interesting. I want to jump to the painting. I think the painting really stands for something because we see it in a couple of shots, and just the way it's depicted with the colors, very the corporate, type of thing. But what I did notice was as they went into close-ups in this painting, did you all notice that Mark's face, his eyes are the only ones that are closed. Everyone else's eyes are open. And just even I think I'm observing, looking at the painting right now as we speak too, just the use of the color of white and blue and the tones. It was kind of neat that we got to see pretty much every character that we've seen highlighted in the show. What did this bring up for you all as you were seeing the painting?
For me, I immediately Mark's he's sitting at the computer refining with one hand up with his eyes closed and kind of head back. To me, that felt very messianic and intentionally so. And that's why they kept treating him like they treat Mark S with some disrespect. And I just feel like they don't think he's the Messiah at all, because once he's done with Cold Harbor, he is expendable. But I feel like he's on this, for them, this spiritual, existential mission to complete something so important to their project. They're all kind of, they're so excited about it. They're really, really building it up. And I feel like that is why they've painted him in that way, and with all the people on the show, including the doppelgangers from episode 4, I still don't know what the hell they were, all watching on in great excitement and anticipation for what he's about to do. That's how I read it. What about you guys? What did you think, Shadan?
I just want to say I thought it was brilliant that the last shot of the show was also mural-like, but it had sort of the reds and the blues, and it had Helly and Mark. So I kind of liked how they brought the mural motif back and ended with it. So this is probably something we're going to see again.
It reminded me of Cold Harbor too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Diego.
No, I was gonna say, yeah, I completely agree. I think I love just the scope of that. I feel like there's been other murals in the past that, they show important events that, might happen, or events that have happened in the mythology. But this one, I think, was one that I think the scope of it just, again, outreached any previous mural. I do want to say that there's, again, like you said, the interesting parallel between this mural and then the ending with that final frame. And it was interesting to me with that final frame where I feel like you actually saw a little bit of the film grain come in that, we saw in the episode with Mark and Gemma and those memories of Mark and Gemma. And I think, we'll discuss that in a second, but just the way that final frame combined, those mural qualities with those qualities of Mark and Gemma's was just a perfect way of, showing both, the inner and outer conflict of everything going on.
I felt like and what was interesting again with this particular portrait or painting was that they really did make sure that we saw it. You know, there was like, I think in the past,
Mm.
was like quick glimpses, but we really had a moment to take this picture in. And I had that same feeling, Rob, that it, even though he wasn't really treated like Messiah, just at least for this particular project, he was the one for them. It was him that was going to bring them all to what they needed to be at. And then I think I think there's snow in it too that reminded me of what Cold
Mm.
Harbor stands for. I know everybody's anticipating, and I'm happy to jump back and forth. We can jump to some of the film, the way the images were captured toward the ends. Diga, I'm gonna start with you because you've mentioned it a few times that the ending stood out to you. So, what were there any theories that came up, or what did those moments mean for you?
I mean, something that I really enjoyed about the ending, and I actually would somewhat compare it a little bit to the Mr. Robot season 4 ending, where I think a lot of people in, coming up to the end of that show, there were a lot of these kind of really like complex, intricate theories about, what's going to be revealed, what's actually happening. And Mr. Robot chose to, really end those beats on just a more emotional core. And I think this finale kind of does the same thing. I mean, it's not a series finale, but I think there were so many big, big questions that I think a lot of people, including myself, expected this show to straight up answer. And I feel like the majority of them were left unanswered in hopes of really ending with that strong emotional core. I think though the execution of the ending, I love the concept. I feel like the execution could have been a bit better. We'll talk about it in a second, but I loved the whole aspect of Mark literally had to choose between Gemma and Helly. And I think it's just a really interesting thing that they were doing when it came to almost like now at the end of the season, they're almost at the inverse somewhat of, where Mark and Gemma were, a couple episodes ago. I will say, I feel like the choice didn't feel that he had to make didn't feel as strong as it could have. Like, obviously there's staying in, going out. But there's still with the logic of the show, there's still, Mark is currently staying in, but he's eventually gonna have to clock out. I don't know if Lumen is going to do this whole thing where they're gonna now make it seem like if Mark completely died. I would maybe like to see that happening to make the choice feel a little bit stronger. But I feel like, if there was something that made the choice feel a little bit more final where Mark was choosing for the end of eternity, or at least he thinks it's either going out and staying out or staying in and not being able to ever go out again. I think that would have made the choice feel a little bit more like hit a little bit more hard. I think that would have, changed a little bit of where the show is going. And yeah, just one of those things where again, I think I love the concept. I love what the ending was trying to do, but I feel like it could have hit just a little bit harder to really kind of, sell the fact that it's the end of the season and to keep us all at the edge of our seats just as much as they were 3 years ago at season 1.
I think maybe knowing that we're getting a season 3 maybe lowered the stakes a little bit. I felt very much the same way. And I don't know if, I mean, maybe other people do feel more connected to Mark and Helly, but I don't. I feel like this season, especially sort of episode 7 that we kept talking about, like really made me feel connected to Mark and Gemma. And I felt like sort of their elevator moment or where they like finally come together was really beautifully done. So I was like, I guess I'm supposed to care about Mark and like that conversation that I think Diego you mentioned between Mark and Helly was really beautifully done and like I do understand that they have a connection, but because it was sort of like for some of the time or maybe all of the time, whatever, he didn't even know that she was an Egan. It's like it feels nefarious, sort of Mark and Helly being together, and even there's sort of this shot of Helly when she's looking back at Gemma when she's running away with Mark, and she kind of has this like nefarious look on her face. So like I'm just not as invested in them as a couple. And I do want to say something though, really quick, something about that Mark and Helly conversation that stood out to me. She says, but even if she's telling the truth, she's talking about Miss Cobell. She says, even if she's telling the truth, we're screwed either way. And that's what I came away with ultimately with this season is like, regardless of what happens, they're screwed. Because, when Mark says to Gemma, like, we can rebuild our life together, it's like, can you though? Like, yeah, I don't know. How do you come back from any of the things that have happened? So that's kind of what I'm just left with. My ultimate impression is like, how do you rebuild any sort of relationship after this?
I really think Diego and Shadana are onto something. I think I totally agree with both how you reacted to the ending, but my take is a little different only because we didn't really have any stakes for Helly and Mark. That's right, compared to how Mark, Scout, and Gemma, how that's been built up throughout the season. But I just feel like the rug was pulled from under us intentionally. So it was like, well, they built up at the beginning of the episode that Mark S does have agency, does have a right to exist, wants his life as well. He doesn't know any better, and he loves Helly, and that's more important to him than his outies wife. And so at the end, if Mark had gone through the door and gone into the stairwell with Gemma, I actually would have felt a little cheated because the innie Mark is not that altruistic that everything else doesn't matter and the only thing that matters is his outie's wife. For him, he doesn't give a shit about his outie's wife. He cares about Helly. And so I did like that he said, F you, I'm actually going to do what I want to do for me. I thought, okay, good. But then I was like, but now what? Because you're in there, you're running away. Dr. Mauer is screaming, running after you, saying you'll kill them all. And then it goes to red. And as Diego very rightly says, it turned into a grainy type filmic cinematic aesthetic, similar to that amazing episode that we all still love that Jessica Lee Gagne directed, Chikai Bardo. And then it just freezes, and then we get this really weird red and white title sequence, and I was just like, okay, now I feel even more cheated. I would have preferred him to go through the freaking door with his wife, and then we'll see what happens after that. So I'm confused, particularly after, we'll talk about the marching band, I guess, in more detail. After that whole sequence, I just thought, would I have made the episode like this? Probably not. However, am I an amazing TV creator and artist? No. So I guess we'll just have to go with the flow, as they say, and see where they're going to take this. But I felt kind of happy that he did that, but then confused. And then looking back at the whole episode, thought, do I need to maybe watch this again and let it sit with me for a few days? Because right now I'm not getting that amazing psyched sense that we just watched a masterpiece. That's not how I'm feeling at all.
I'm with you on that too, Rob. I'm not feeling like that too. Like I was excited to see episode 10. And as Diego had mentioned, there were a lot of questions that were left unanswered during the season. So we thought, okay, and we've discussed this on the show as well too, that episode 10 maybe will help answer some of those questions. And I think it did a little bit. Like we got some clarity about what happens to the baby goats. Not too much. Obviously, they are sacrificed, which I was not happy to see. That's a whole different story. But I think there were a lot of things that were still not fully answered. And this also leads me to question, well, what is going to happen to these innies now? Because they are not in the same situation as they were once we entered the season. I mean, at this point, they are going to be sought after. You know, it's a high alert situation here. You've got 3 people who've rebelled against, you know, even Mr. Milchek, right? Going even back to, let's jump back to the band scene. That was a lot for me. As interestingly as it was with the choreography, and as someone who's been a musician, a musical player, like it was fun. And I was like, okay, I'm done. I was done when we saw the wax figure talking. That was a bit eerie. And then to jump into this entire band thing and just a lot, like I felt like that could have been cut down just a little bit. I understand what they were trying to do and what that scene was setting up for Mark to, you know, run out and then to kind of like fight against Mr. Milchek. But I just felt like it went on forever. How did you all feel with the band scene?
I completely agree. I think it like I will say I like when shows, take somewhat stylistic departures. I think I loved the aspect where they, a show that's typically pretty static and locked and smooth is now just going completely into the handheld territory. And I think that threw me off in a great way at the start. And then it just kept on going and going and going. And I was like, okay, so what really? I think that whole element of after, he clicked the 25th file, it's done. Yeah, it just kind of fell a little bit flat for me. It's also I think the whole aspect of Milchek at the very end, being able to knock the vending machine down. Why didn't he try that from the start? If he had the strength to do that, why wasn't it just done at the very start? And I think I think specifically for me, it's the element of Milchek trying to break out. It just went on for way too long. It just felt really incredibly unrealistic. And I think cutting that down could have made, other parts of the episode actually shine more. It could have made, I think, the technical shifting gears in that section stand out more as a piece of good direction or great direction, I would say, instead of just, a little bit of something that felt a little bit gimmicky and it went on for a little bit too long. But that's just my opinion on the situation.
No, I completely agree. I think the comedy bit too also went on too long for me. And even as I mentioned, the bit with Gwendolyn Christie and the gun and the blood, I felt like that felt like it was like a completely different show. I also agree with you, Rob. I think story-wise, they had no choice but to sort of have to have Mark choose Helly in order for the show to continue. Because, and I also, to go back to the beginning, I thought the conversation that Helly sort of has with her father, quote unquote, like where he seems very invested in her and he says, like, I see Kira in you, sort of sets up a lot for season three potentially. So that's why I said, like, it just feels very disjointed of like, we got a lot, this like exposition dump at the beginning, and then it's just like action, action, action towards the end. Mike, welcome.
Hey guys,
Hello, we've
like
got Mike
Dylan and
joining
the
us
yeah,
back from one of the
sorry.
rooms, huh?
Sorry for the being late. Like Dylan and the vending machine, I am here at the 11th hour, so thank you so much.
Well, we are happy you are here. We are happy you are here. We're just going through some of the scenes. I think there's going to be a lot of questions, I think, coming out still from episode 10. Because I feel like a lot of things were still left unanswered. And one of the things I'd love to ask you all is I don't think we still have full clarity on who the goat people are, right? Like, yes, we see the goats are being
Yep.
sacrificed, but who are these people? Where did they come from? What's happening with them? Clearly they're breeding goats and we keep sacrificing them for something, right?
Takeaways for me from the goat scene and the marching band sequences, like these people are fed up. Like they're in separate departments, but they're all ready to be done with this. And so, if we're looking for a thematic through line,
Well,
Yeah.
that's when
Like,
Gwen also says, right? No more killing. And I
yeah.
felt
yeah.
like that kind of personified two different, it had different meanings. It wasn't just for the animals. I felt it went in
Yeah.
two ways, right? For
I feel
that.
like I was going to talk a bit more about the marching band, but before we go back to that, because I feel like I want to hear what Mike has to say. Um, Gwendolyn Christie's character, to me, was one of the heroes of the episode. I think intentionally, she was written that way, and great performance, by the way, from Gwendolyn Christie. So when she is offering up this goat, and then of course it all culminates in the really bloody, violent episode outside in the corridor. I was really, I really enjoyed that, but it didn't really feel like Severance. I totally agree. I think Shadan, you just said that, but that's okay. Like I don't mind them doing that again, pulling a rug from underneath us and making us feel a bit uncertain as to where we're going with this. Because I feel like every time the show starts to feel a bit predictable, like we all were really conning onto the Four Tempers and how Mark was doing something about that was Gemma's Four Tempers. We were already starting to clue into that, and we were right. But then all this started happening with the goats, still unexplained, and the marching, choreography and merriment and all this stuff, and then the ending, and I was just like, okay, I have no idea really where they're going with this, and that's okay. But that sometimes when you're feeling a bit like discombobulated, that's okay, but it's not necessarily a good thing. And I feel like maybe they do need to be a little tighter with their narrative structure because by the end of the episode, I just don't feel like what was the point? It could have been a 20-minute episode to give us some of that payoff. The rest of it was just like, I don't know what I'm watching here. And I'm hoping by season 3, a lot of that maybe will be explained, or not explained, but at least contextualized. What did you think, Mike?
I'm
You
seeing
tell
Mike
us
shaking his head. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got to be honest, and I know that you guys probably touched on this, but my overall thoughts were it is an excellent hour of television in an otherwise frustrating and sort of very very scattered season. I really found a lot of my frustrations, especially because I thought everything was going to build up to this finale and all these different things that have happened throughout the season would have some sort of payoff, but we barely got any. I think, like for example, Ir- Irv was kind of wasted. I mean, after episode 4, nothing happens with him like at all. I think obviously there's stuff with Fields and there's stuff with Bert, but But what does that have to do with anything? It didn't really have anything to do with anything. The goat people, we get an entire episode devoted to them for 3 minutes of Gwendolyn Christie and here, and that's supposed to be the payoff for that. We had a whole Cobell episode, which literally had nothing to do with anything. If this is supposed to be a season about Mark's journey, why deviate and have this episode that has literally nothing to do with anything? The doppelgangers from Woe's Hollow, literally no explanation, nothing about that. There's a lot. I also think, like, in a lot of ways, we have this wonderful arc that's building up for Milchick. And then here in this last episode, he just goes back to his old ways. And I'm kind of like, what was the point then? It really destroys that. We had so many red herrings with Rickon too. So much time dedicated to him writing a book. None of this is actually none of this has anything to do with anything. So I'm kind of like, this is a very uneven season of television when you break it down. And that's what really frustrated me about this season of TV. We waited 3 years for this, and there's no payoff at all. There's a small amounts of payoff, particularly when it comes to Cold Harbor, when it comes to Gemma. That part I liked, and I thought that this was a well-shot, really engaging, really thrilling episode. But it just felt like a kind of a waste of a season at times because, so much of this I felt like was weird for the sake of being weird rather than actually having some sort of a purpose. And I know that that's just Severance, but at the same time, I want more than that. We could do the weird for the sake of being weird thing when we're setting up the first season and the series and this world and everything like that. But now that we're deep into a second season, and we know this world and we know these characters and we have these questions already being asked, now's the time for you guys to start answering much of them rather than just introducing random things here and there. And I love that they've got experimental, but it kind of toys with us in a way that I just don't think there's a whole lot of payoff for. So I got kind of frustrated by the end of this episode, not because of the episode itself, which I actually did enjoy, but because of everything before it, which just felt all over the place. And I was just like,
maybe like episode 7 to 10 were all over the place. Do you feel, or
I felt like yes, but then even going back to like episode 4, which don't get me wrong, I was intrigued by Woe's Hollow and everything going on there. What was the point? Other than Irv exposing Helly, what was really the point? And we're going to probably get payoff eventually, years down the line. But at what point am I actually going to be invested anymore? Because you keep doing this, you keep introducing things early on in the season that are supposed to have ramifications years down the line. I'm not going to remember any of that. I'm sorry. There's just too much to go through. Even going through the first season to try and remember things like Felicia and optics and O&D and everything like that was kind of difficult. So I really think that they need to make the show. I know this is going to sound like maybe I'm dumb, but I think that they need to make it a little bit more accessible because at this point in time, you're not treating the audience like they're smart. You're not trying to help the audience. You're just screwing with them. And I'm kind of like, guys, I love the artistry here, but come on. Sorry.
Something that Rob has brought up repeatedly, we've all talked about, is like, trust the process, trust Severance. Like, everything they're doing has a point, everything has a purpose. Like, we've said that multiple times throughout. Exactly, though, Rob. Now we're like, is that true?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like now I feel like the trust is gone. The like faith that we put in, like how much faith are we willing to put into Severance at this point? And like clearly for season 2, they increased the budget, they increased sort of they let the reins go. And I feel like a lot of what we saw as a result of that, of like a filmmaker sort of having a lot more creative freedom, and we got some cool things as a result of that. But now I'm like, was that a mistake? And for season 3, as you said brilliantly, Mike, like how much am I going to be willing to go on this ride anymore? How invested am I going to be?
Well, I'm hoping there's not that much of a lag time. I think the 3 years was a huge lag for audiences. And it may have created a little bit more of a disconnect too. So I'm definitely, maybe we should call Dan. I don't think that, the timing of the 3 years is going to work. And it felt like a lot of hodgepodge scenes were thrown together. But I just keep going back to the unanswered questions that we've all had. And something that's been kind of ruminating in my head is the consciousness. Why were there 25 rooms, or that whatever it was that in the subconsciousness, why did we, or consciousness, now I'm confused on the word too, but why were there 25? What did each of those 25 signify? Because at first I was relating it to the different emotions or different experiences, right? We were talking about the dentistry, flying, different, the loss of the baby, which is hurt and pain. But 25, does anybody have any thoughts, or I don't know, any assumptions on what that could signify?
I think it's they do say that we've created that many innies for her, and I think there is still some level of credibility for the argument that they are creating something, as Diego mentioned early on in our chat. They probably are trying to market this to the world, perhaps with these experiences that no one wants. If I could sever myself to go to the dentist, man, I'm doing it right now because I do not like going to the dentist. But then of course there's a lot of nefarious stuff going on underneath. And before I let my esteemed colleagues speak, I just wanted to touch on something that Mike just said, and that is everything, Mike, that you just said in your venting session, particularly the last like 30 seconds. I think that needs to be emblazoned on a t-shirt because it's exactly right. It's just like, I love this show so much. I respect it. I respect the writers. I admire them. But this season had so many highs, amazing highs, but a few middle of the range lows. And so that made it disjointed. A lot of this show is giving, for me, The Leftovers, which to me is probably one of the greatest TV shows ever made. And not a lot of answers were given in The Leftovers until very late on in the third season. The incredible show that was. But it was also extremely weird and felt disjointed and tonally was quite off sometimes, just like this. And when that mannequin came out with Milchick, and I was literally sitting back like this, wondering what the F am I watching? And I felt sometimes that way with The Leftovers too. And so I do have faith that they're going to get somewhere with this, but I think the audience needs to be a bit more respected, because if you're not doing a deep dive on this show like we are every week, how on earth are you getting through this show? Because you're just like, what am I watching now? And when I watch this with my family, when the marching band comes out, I know they're all going to be looking at me like, what the F is this? So I think like it's good to have constructive criticism. We love this show. We love you guys. It's amazing. But come on, like what are we doing? Anyway.
I'm sorry, all these things are going into my head. And the other thing that was coming into right now was the actual Cold Harbor test. We didn't really get to the end of that test, right? It's because it was disrupted. But to me, I felt like that test was really getting to the bottom of not having human beings feel or remember, because they were so excited. I mean, that moment for a woman who has lost her baby and then to go into this room with nothing but a crib is one of the most painful experiences for someone who's wanting to have a baby. And for this woman, for Gemma, like to just feel so disconnected, she's just pulling the crib apart, really signified on how happy they were that, oh, we're able to control human emotions. We don't have to feel sadness or hurt or pain. So I felt like it was really going to take us into another level of what they're really trying to create for the human experience. We didn't quite get there. And I thought there was that interesting dichotomy between when Mark S walks in and you see the conversation happening between them and the toying between feelings of like trust, love, a pain, all these different things. So that scene was very pivotal for me.
Yeah, I again to go back to the beginning, like I liked that Cobell finally told us, like we got confirmation that like each one of the clusters was a temper and like, there's 25. And so my question was like, well, where are the other 24? So are there like multiple did the innies die once they're done? Like where do they go? Like I mean, these are questions that I would really like to know. I mean, I agree with everything that everyone said. My question is, I guess it depends on like what you want out of this show. Like if are you watching for like more of the emotional stuff? Are you watching for the downright weird? I think if you're watching because you like the sort of the sci-fi questions, then you're gonna be disappointed because it's a lot of stuff being thrown at you without much resolution. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, to shock to no one, is my favorite movie, and I like how this show kind of plays with the idea of like we need our emotions, like our, to what Rasha is saying about the building of the crib, and so I would like it to get into more of that into season 3. I do think there's some interesting questions that are set up. But yeah, the frustrations are, I feel like I'm a Lumen employee through and through because I'm like, the frustrations are building. Like what Dylan says, like, F you, Milchick. I'm like, yeah, like, F you. Like, what is it?
But Shadon, you were also frustrated with Mrs. Cobell, I understand.
I'm frustrated with everybody. And also, I just want to bring up a tiny, tiny point. When Milchick like gives Mark the card, I was like, is that a waffle? Is it like a maze?
Yeah.
That's why I was like, oh, is Milchick like is he sending a message with the card? Like, is it supposed to represent something? But then to your point, Mike, like kind of goes back to his old ways. So yeah, I'm a mess. Like I said, this is gonna elicit emotional reactions. Here we are.
I felt like it was a maze/waffle. So I don't know. I think there was a fork and a knife in there too, wasn't there?
There was.
There was.
Really quickly, I want to bring up something that Mike mentioned too, which is I think it's interesting, like, and no disrespect to Adam Scott, who I think is very good on this show, but how do we feel about the fact that he's sort of like very secondary in my opinion? Like he's kind of been outacted by most of his cast members. I mean, I think, for me, the big is it Tremel Tillman? Tremel Tillman was the big sort of MVP. I think how do we feel about the fact that he's sort of supposed to be, to the earlier point, like our linchpin here, but I feel like the most of the season wasn't really about him. Like, what do we make of that?
Wow.
I'm with you. Yeah. I'm with you, Shadon. But I felt though, that's why in episode 10, all of a sudden, you're seeing him in these different situations, right? And where he's stepping up to the game. We see him in this accidental killing of Drummond. We see him fighting. We see his innie and outie and their conflict together. Like, I felt like maybe that's why episode 10 threw him kind of into the center and spotlight, where it really does revolve more around him, and we're seeing the other cast kind of just supporting him through. But yeah, I still think Tremel has definitely fully shown through a lot of the episodes and through his acting.
I think out of all the characters, when it comes to their innies at least, it's like Mark almost feels like, or like Mark S feels like a teenager who thinks he's experienced everything and who he knows everything about the world, and he really doesn't. And I think it's just been really frustrating to see that. I feel like his, like to say, like emotional maturity has stayed the same versus I feel like Helly has had some developments, Dylan has had some developments, Irving, I mean, in a way, he was taken out, but I feel like his character had a lot of development. I personally think Mark Scout, I think what Adam Scott was doing with Mark Scout was phenomenal. I think that was a great development to see throughout the season. I think Mark S has kind of stayed the same. He just, to me, not a very interesting character. Sorry, they're all very interesting characters, but compared to the other characters in the current space, Mark S just isn't very interesting to me. He isn't very compelling to me. I don't know how much I would fault Adam Scott for that over Jan Erickson or the writers. Just because, like, even just the final decision, I just feel like he just lacked empathy for Mark Scout. Like, that was something that's been a little bit hard for me to compute. Is like, how do you lack that much empathy for your outie? Like, I understand, not wanting to just adhere to whatever your outie says, but I feel there's a certain point where it's like becomes to a complete lack of empathy. I felt like he didn't even try to understand what Mark Scout was doing, what he was going for. And I think that's, to me, just made him kind of a character that's just, again, compared to the rest of the characters in Seventh, that I think they're all very well-written characters, he felt just a little bit flat to me.
But you know what's interesting? This reminded me of human beings in general, really quick about as far as like you have this inner person fighting so much to be who they want to be or who they are, right? Against the personification of who they are in the outside world. I don't know, as I was watching Mark Adam Scott's character throughout this entire thing, especially in episode 10, it just reminded me in the similarities of how people behave in life. Like there's a part of you that's who you are, but then there's a part of you who's showing up in the world differently. And maybe for some people, there's so much inner conflict of who they really want to show up as and who they really want to be that it finally just escalates to this whole different level. I don't know. That was just something that just came to my mind.
Shadan, I
Wanted
mean,
to share.
Rasha, put that on a t-shirt. I like that too.
Yeah.
And Shadan,
Oh,
I'm
we're just
gonna,
going to create a business here with our t-shirts
we're
now. We
creating
got
a
to talk to our
business.
executive producer here.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, I feel like I'm gonna push back a little bit on what Shadan said, and I don't do that very often because everything she says is so amazing. But I feel like I thought Mark Adam Scott really was quite incredible this season. I feel like he was the MVP for me. Diego's right that Mark S is not as compelling, I guess, as Mark Scout, and I feel like a lot of that is intentional. That this what's the word, infantilizing of this character that they've done intentionally, I think really worked for me, but maybe that does close him off to the audience a little and doesn't allow us to empathize with him because he is trying so hard to make him like a teenager. It's a really good analogy, Diego. I really like that. So yeah, I think it's good that we can feel a bit uncomfortable about how certain things are portrayed in this show. And I felt like all the acting in this show is fantastic. I think the other MVP is Britt Lauer because with the way that her face slightly changes when she's Helena or when she's Helly S, in terms of the way she delivers certain lines, was quite chilling for me. And I could see sometimes when Helly S is in a scene, I could see aspects of Helena there as well, and which I think was intentional. And Tremel Tillman has done an amazing job all season. I just feel like this episode did not really do him justice because he ended up, to me, being very clownish when he hands Dylan that the note from his Audi, and then he swings around and runs off. I was just like, what? Yeah, what was that? And then, of course, the merriment and choreography, that whole thing, I just was like, are we really doing this to poor Tremel Tillman? Like, come on. So that's where I'm at. I'm kind of a bit like, I don't know what to say.
Yeah, after he earned so much through this season too, that was one of the things that just disappointed me was this episode did such a disservice to everything that they built for him. Circling back though to Adam Scott, definitely not his fault. I think his performance here was phenomenal, especially in this episode. The argument with the video camera, I thought was honestly one of the best and centralized, it encompasses everything that Severance is. The conflict between the innie and the outie. And I wish that this entire season had more of that for Mark. Because if it was more of that, then that would have been such a compelling story arc for him for an entire season. But unfortunately, what it really ended up becoming was Mark Scout definitely had a really good arc with him on the search for his wife. And then Mark S's arc was, I like Helly. And that was it. I mean, like, it just it culminates and is that for the entire season, from the goat episode where he and Helly are investigating things to this episode, it's just I like Helly. And that to me is just, there's nothing more there when you do actually have characters that are so much more interesting and do stand out. Britt Lauer was phenomenal this year. And not just as Helena and Helly, but both of those characters, those the innie and the outie, were both phenomenal, story arcs this season, character arcs this season. And watching her go between the two different extremes of those personalities was also a joy to watch. So I love that. And then we talked about Milchik, of course, but Tremel just did a really terrific job because the subtle changes on his face where you knew he was hurt, but he was trying to hide it because he's trying to be a company man. Those were the moments that I loved his character the most. His performance absolutely needs to be lauded and nominated for an Emmy. It just got wasted by this episode though, and uh, it's a little heartbreaking to say the least. But I want next year, hopefully, more for Mark, more like the camera argument, and then more for Milchek as a character, actual, some turning point where he actually commits to one way or another rather than just he's one way this week and then next week he's not, So yeah, that's what I'm hoping for.
Well, I definitely do think the show is going to have some Emmy nods coming their way.
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's
Oh,
been
yeah.
a powerful season. They've had a lot of conversation and dialogue, and I think audiences have taken a lot of note of this show and what's even developed in season 2. What are we hoping for season 3? What would we like to see?
That's the big question, isn't it? About 10 minutes before the episode ended, I actually envisaged this moment and thought, okay, Rush is going to ask the question, what do we think about? And so I started wandering off in my mind for a minute, maybe. So maybe I missed something really good in the show. I don't know. And I was thinking, okay, what do I think is going to happen? Maybe this is going to be an episode where it's about Mark and Gemma taking Lumen down from the outside, or we'll see a more macro international scope of what Lumon's doing and how this one thing at Cold Harbor, they're doing it elsewhere. And so this is not the end for the Egan's big quest. And then, of course, it ended the way it ended. And now I'm thinking we are I can imagine we're either going to pick up the show where we left off, or maybe more likely we'll pick up the show where Mark S is back on the severed floor and he's either refining again, or he is now the subject of the new consciousnesses, and maybe the roles are now reversed, not necessarily with Gemma, but maybe with Helly or Helena. That's what I think is going to happen. But who the hell knows? Like, we got a marching band, we got an episode in a forest, we got characters bumping uglies on the floor in tents. We got all kinds of really cool stuff. So I'm all down. I'm really excited, but I do want to reiterate to our lovely friends over at the Severance creative team and Apple TV Plus, please hurry the F up. I'm not waiting around forever,
Not 3 years.
because life's way too short, and quite frankly, I need you to
We need
start
answers.
giving me more answers.
Yeah.
Get on with it.
Diego.
I would say, see, because right now where Severance is at, there's kind of two shows that just come to mind that I recently started off loving, one I ended loving, one I actually fell off of, and that's Westworld and Mr. Robot, who, in my opinion, both had phenomenal, era-defining first seasons. And then they both kind of somewhat faltered. I wouldn't say necessarily faltered, but they were a little bit more inconsistent in their second season. Mr. Robot was able to tighten a bit more focus. And in my opinion, season 3 and 4 of Mr. Robot are up on just best seasons of television of all time. In my opinion, better than the classic Breaking Bad. Westworld season 3, and I think didn't even get I don't think it got a season 4. Just completely fell apart. It got way too complex. In a way that just wasn't calculated at all. And for me, just lost all interest. And I think Severance, as much as I love it right now, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes either way. I really, really hope it goes away, Mr. Robot, where, it maintains consistency, it sharpens up a bit, and it really takes a different direction. I think what I would like to see is, I don't know in what way, because obviously, the creative team is much smarter than I or anyone else here is, and they probably know what's best to do for the show, but it needs some sort of radical change, whether that's location, whether that's perspective, whether that's how certain information is delivered. Because I feel like a lot of I feel like the season finale didn't really feel like a season finale to me. It felt like a big shift, but not a shift to the level of, again, to bring another show that I think is, an all-timer, Succession, where I feel like at the end of each season, the relationship between characters and what the show was going to be is completely different from where season one, sorry, from where the season started. I think that was very much the case with Severance season one. That wasn't really the case with Severance season two. I feel like if you told me this was episode 9 and there was going to be a season finale after this episode, I would believe you. I would think that's going to be a phenomenal episode. But that's just how I kind of was left feeling after the end of season 2. So for me, just need some sort of radical shift. Again, I don't know what that radical shift would be, but I just think like where things are left off right now, it doesn't feel as radical as where season 1 left off.
Interesting. Shadon?
I think, Diego, you mentioned all these iconic shows. I think when we talk about the iconic shows of the 2020s, Severance is going to be one of them. But as you said, the question is going to be, is it because we're going to talk about, oh, we got so much payoff and all these things from season 2 that we're talking about, they did have a purpose or they don't? I feel like you're exactly right. Like we're like kind of right in the middle of like, and it's hard to judge a show in the middle. Like because we don't know which way it's going to go. So I'm going to keep the faith, I guess. I just think Helly, she's such a fascinating character. So I hope we kind of play more with like, is she nefarious, good, bad, etc. I would love to see more of that. And then I would like to see, you mentioned brilliantly, like, yeah, Mark S has been stunted. Why? Just show me that all these creative choices had a purpose. That's what I want from season 3.
Awesome. And Mike?
Two things. Two things I really want. Focus and consistency. Those are the two things that I think this show needs at this point in time. For me, when you look at some of the best shows in the past couple of years, Diego, you mentioned Succession. I'm going to cite Better Call Saul, one of my favorites in the past decade, honestly, one of the best shows in the past decade, I think. Everything within those shows, it's rooted in character and it's rooted in the development of those characters up to a crescendo where everything actually makes sense and it blends together perfectly. With Severance, it's hard to see the point and the purpose with a lot of these things because sometimes these, the choices that they make aren't rooted in character. They're not rooted in narrative. They're just rooted in surrealism, and that's fine. I don't care if you put a stop motion watermelon juggling chickens in the middle of the show because that's something that's very Severance. I don't care if they want to do that. What I want is that each episode that they have builds equally upon every single one of the characters that they've introduced, giving them something interesting to do from the very beginning of the season to the end of the season. I don't want anything where we're going to focus on one character and then mix things up with the rest of the characters and then focus again on a single character. Things have to actually, make sense, build and actually thematically and narratively work for your characters. Even with Dylan, for example, everything with Merritt Weaver, I felt she was kind of wasted this year, I mean, she had some great moments and everything like that, and I love that. And that storyline does have at least a little bit of payoff with the note that Outie Dylan writes Innie Dylan. But to me, I'm like, you had Merritt Weaver for that? Like, really? Like, there's nothing there. That has no ramifications. What about Miss Huang? what happened there? You're not, because they shift the focus so volatilely, I guess, on different characters at different times. You're not giving any of the characters and the narratives that are needed their due. And I really want them to do that next season. Give everyone a little bit so that it all builds up to something that makes sense and actually has payoff by the end of the season for these characters and their arcs. I want them to actually have arcs. I don't want them to just be hanging there. So that to me is what I want: focus and consistency. I know that I'm not going to get that because this is Severance, but as close as we can get, I'll be happy.
Put that on a shirt. Focus and consistency.
Yep. And the crescendo needs to continue. Well, this has been so much fun. I want to thank my team here. Rob L.
I'm
Diego.
Focused, I'm consistent, and thank you again, Rasha.
Diego A.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Shadon L.
Yeah, I just feel really grateful for this experience and get to talk with all of you about this. And this has just been so much fun. So thank you for having me.
And Mike M.
Though I might have controversial opinions about the season of Severance, I have zero controversial opinions about Processing Severance. It's been a wonderful season, and I couldn't be more grateful to have conversed with this entire series with much better people. Anyone better than you guys. It's just been brilliant and wonderful, and I'm grateful. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's been so much fun. And I want to give a shout out to our producer, Scott M., who you don't see, but is on the other side of this. Again, you've been watching Processing Severance, the Aftershow podcast. And we all, on behalf of this show, just want to take a moment to and thank all of you, our viewers and listeners. This has been so much fun. Please don't forget to even leave comments on this one because we'd love to hear from you. And you may have some theories that we didn't discuss. There, of course, was a lot to cover in this episode. So we may have missed over something. Feel free to share your thoughts and do keep spreading the word. Do share our episodes and our show with your friends and family and other people. We want to continue the momentum and keep going. And we will see you back when season 3 returns. I'm Rasha G on behalf of Processing Severance. Thank you so much.